Hello everyone, David and Haring here again. So in this video we are going to talk about assigning variables in Rebol. It's a very easy thing, but it also has some interesting depth to it that you might not expect if you're coming from a traditional programming language. So let's fire up our interpreter, typing R3 here, and we're at the Rebol console prompt. So how do you assign a variable in Rebol? So let's say you want a variable called num, and you want to assign it the integer 5. So that's pretty much it. You've just assigned 5 to the Rebol word num. Num is acting as a variable in this case. So if I just type it back into the interpreter and hit enter, it evaluates num and returns 5. So this is a little bit different from other programming languages where you might have an equal for the assignment statement or a colon equal for Pascal, for example. And let's do a few more assignments here. So let's say we want to assign a string. So we saw a little bit of this in the last video with the hello world. A string is delimited by 2 quotes, double quotes. So there's a string, and I can evaluate it and it returns a string. So let's do a few more data types here. As in other languages, Rebol has data types. In Rebol's case, it has a lot of data types. There's an enormous number of data types compared to other languages. And so let's keep on with this. So let's say we're going to define pi here. 3.14159. I think that's enough decimal places. So now we have pi defined. So we've done some of the usual suspects for data types. We've got integers, decimals, and strings. So what are some other interesting ones that we can look at here? Well, let's say you want to define a color. So we're going to call a color, and we're going to give it an RGB value. And so we've just defined a color. So what if we want to define a URL, a web address? In most languages, you would define that as a string. In Rebol, there is a data type for that. It's a URL data type. So we can just say, we'll just call our variable site here, and we're going to point it to the Rebol website. And there you go. It had no problem at all with that. So if I type in site now, it evaluates to the URL. So this is a characteristic, a feature of Rebol that really helps make your scripts more readable. Instead of having to wrap everything in strings or other things, you can put these things, you can refer to them in your code in a more natural way, in a more human readable way. So I'm going to introduce a new function here called type question mark, so you can look and see it'll return what the data type is for what you've just done. We'll get into this more in the data types video coming up in the near future, but let's do a type question mark on what we've already defined. So that's an integer. Num is an integer. str for string, that's a string. Pi is a decimal. Color is a data type tuple. And finally, site is a URL. So these are all native data types in Rebol, and this is how you do variable assignments. So Rebel's made up of words, and words have data types and values. So this color, what we've done in the past with using functions like print and do and form and type question mark, these are things I've introduced for the purposes of doing these examples. These are really all variables that are pointing to native functions inside the interpreter. There are no keywords in Rebol. You can redefine print, you can redefine type question mark. Everything is malleable. And also, while I'm thinking about it, Rebol is also case insensitive. So if I type in, if I want to evaluate our site variable, I can. It doesn't matter what the case is. So that's important to remember if you're coming from other languages, is that Rebol internally is case sensitive. All right, so that is data assignment or variable assignment. So one last thing, talking about data types and as it relates to variable assignment. When I defined pi earlier on with the pi colon, and then I gave it my number, and you have to have a space there. That's another important thing. You cannot say pi colon 3.14159. If there's no space there, then that's not going to work for you. Other languages will allow that. Rebol will not allow it. But that pi colon, that is actually a data type. That is not something that's parsed in the language in any special manner. Pi colon is a data type of set word. And in order to demonstrate that, I need to put that in a block. So let's define a block. So yeah, you can also assign blocks to variables. So let's put that inside of a block. So now if I evaluate B, it's just a block. It's not going to execute that code. Those are inside that block right now. Could be code, could be data. It's just Rebol words in there. So if I want to find out what the data type of that is, of pi colon, I'm going to have to introduce one more thing, which is paths. So type question mark, which we've seen, and now I'm referencing the block. And what I want to do here is reference the first element of that block. I'm asking Rebol, what is the type of the first element of that block? And in this case, the elements are space delimited. There's no comma in between elements in a block. So and what I've introduced here is the /, which is denoting a path, and this is a refinement. It's saying I want the first element of this block. And you'll see that that first element, unevaluated, it's just getting the data type of it. It sees that as a set word. So any kind of a word with a colon at the end, it sees as a set word. And when you're evaluating that in the interpreter, it knows, oh, this is a set word. That means the value after it is going to be assigned to that word. And following the example of picking out values inside of a block, let's see what the type is for that second one. And it's a decimal, as we would expect. And you can also do it, but it's not going to be interesting because we've already defined pi. Let's define pi incorrectly. Let's redefine, let's call this block 2. And let's redefine pi as 2.1, which we know is wrong. Okay, so I've just defined another block called B2. It has these words in there, which to us, we see this as unevaluated, or it's code, but in Rebol's case, it's just unevaluated words. And our current definition of pi is 3.14159. So we introduced B2, or do, in the last video. So let's do this block here. And it returns 2.1. But now let's look at our value of pi. Our value of pi was redefined to 2.1. So you see how things are very malleable. Blocks can hold code or data. This is a very important thing to keep in mind. But that's pretty much it. That variable assignment is very straightforward, but there's a lot more going on under the surface. And my purpose here was just to kind of give you a glimpse into that. Thank you for watching. Oh, one more thing. How do you quit out of the interpreter? We have not talked about that. To exit the interpreter, just type quit. Just another function. And there we go.